All right, welcome. So I'm joined today by Andrew Singer. And because Andrew is a very interesting guy, I just wanted to share a little bit about him before we start our conversation. So Andrew is the owner of Flying Tree Yoga in Medellín, Colombia. He's a teacher trainer specializing in alignment-based yoga flow. And after working for 10 years teaching different languages across the world, he decided in 2014 to dedicate himself to spreading the teachings of yoga into Latin America and beyond. He believes in empowering individuals to find their own path and unique approach to yoga. And Andrew, I saw that you wrote something that really caught my attention that I wanted to ask you about. So you wrote, yoga allows us to celebrate life, which is not maybe something we think about so much, is like this connection between yoga and a celebration for life. So, okay, how does yoga do that?
So this is very much something that was imparted to me through one of my teachers, Gianni Chavez, who works in the world of Anusara yoga. And I think this for me was a real revelation that really resonated. I think the way that I'd first of all gotten acquainted with yoga was very much through the Yoga Sutras, the sort of the path within towards self-knowledge, yoga as a deep state of meditation that sort of can radically transform your understanding of who you are. So very much sort of a kind of a solitary process in many ways, maybe that you do together with other people in a room, but it's very much a sort of a voyage within. And I think that it really surprised me when I started to add some of this sort of more tantric philosophy into the mix, where yoga doesn't just encapsulate sort of understanding of the self, but a connection to all other sort of living beings, and to kind of begin to be able to see the divine in everyone and everything else. So I think that's something that really added a lot of richness to my own approach to yoga, and really resonated as well in terms of the community aspect of what I'm doing out here in Medellín. You know, here we're trying to bring people together from different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages, and give them a space where they can kind of reconnect with the joy of life, I guess. And I think that, the way that we do things here in Flying Tree, by providing these spaces for people to come together and to practice, it enables people to form friendships, community, and different bonds that can bring some kind of back the joy back into life, I guess, that can otherwise be lost in the tough daily grind that many of us face.
Yeah, I think that is why so many of us love and appreciate yoga. You mentioned seeing the divine in others. Is that something that you practice?
For sure. I like to think that my own personal yoga journey has different branches to it. I'm interested in the Bhakti side of things, which is, I guess, how I would describe seeing the divine in everyone and everything. I'm interested in the ideas behind karma yoga as well, and sort of how we act influencing our sort of present and future patterns, and as well jnana yoga and the journey within. But for sure, I mean, I think it's very important to begin to find that sense of what connects us all, at the end of the day. On more than just a kind of a superficial level, but something sort of really fundamentally beyond the thinking mind, beyond all of the sort of problems that we go through day in and day out, and something that really provides us with that sort of mutual interconnectedness. So for sure, seeing the divine in other people and in other things, I think, is often easier for people. I think a lot of people, when they're able to go into nature and, sort of walk alone and just be with the world, and, all of those sort of problems and artificial structures that we sort of superimpose on the world kind of drop away and people are able to feel that sense of just being at peace, and the barrier between themselves and everything that surrounds them just kind of beginning to slowly dissolve. The challenge is when we need to bring those practices back into day-to-day life. When we have to start coming back to work, and we have to start dealing with other personalities, other people's ways of seeing the world that don't concord with our own. And I think that for me is considerably more challenging. So sort of going beyond any sort of superficial, we're all one. It sounds very nice, doesn't it? But how do you really live that? I think is a great question, and I think is one of the much more challenging aspects of bringing these practices into a way that's sort of meaningful in life.
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is pretty important, and maybe a good thing to be aware of, that depending on the environment, the ability to kind of connect to the higher state of being, a sense of oneness, peace, can be very different, right? And probably for most of us, when we're out in nature or even taking a yoga class, right, it's much more acceptable to maybe, rest the judging mind and have these experiences of joy. I kind of see it almost like there's, different levels to the game, right? And that could be like a kind of beginner level in a way, because it's conducive for this. But just as important, because that's a place where, we're strengthening kind of these muscles that we have. Yes. Swami Satchidananda, love what he talks about meditation. And he's like, meditation is something you do all the time. He's like, when you sit down for formal meditation, you're practicing to do something the rest of the time, the rest of your life. And I really like that. Right. And it's like when you're having maybe a heated political discussion or disagreement with someone else, like that's the expert level. Like, can I still be meditating then? Can I still be peaceful then? Can I still see the divine in them in that situation?
Very much so. And I think that personally, for me, this is where my understanding of karma yoga comes in. I mean, karma yoga is not, it's often a very misunderstood and misapplied term that where people talk about doing voluntary service or whatever. But for me, karma yoga really has nothing to do with that at all. Karma yoga is the practicing of consciousness in action. So applying that state of being so present in your actions so that you are not generating this emotional, sort of undigested emotional baggage, as it were, that you then have to process, or that will then influence you at a later date. So in many ways, applying that ability to be 100% present as you act is something that you practice in meditation. You're not acting when you meditate, but you are practicing the aspect of presence.
So presence or consciousness in action, you see that as karma yoga. Why do you see that as karma yoga?
I mean, as far as I understand, that the practice of karma yoga is the practice of avoiding being, or sort of undoing past karmas while avoiding generating future karmas. And for the way that, that's been explained to me when I studied with my philosophy teacher, Carlos Palmela, is that, karmas are these things that sit in our subconscious, these sort of undigested emotional experiences that we have had that can then influence the way that we will act in the future, and that keep us sort of trapped in these painful cycles. It's something that I can feel when I've had, a disagreement with my partner or something. It leaves that sort of painful or uncomfortable emotional residue there for hours or even days or, sort of months afterwards, that needs to be then consciously processed at some point. Otherwise, it ends up becoming the flashpoint for another painful cycle again and again in the future. So I think for me, the understanding that I have with karma yoga is that if you are able to cultivate that presence while you act, that ability to 100% be present so that you're not being caught out by your preferences as to how things should turn out, then you're not going to be generating those sort of undigested emotional residues that will then need to be at some point dealt with down the line. So yes, it's consciousness in action. I think that I'm not sure if those are the exact words used in the Bhagavad Gita, or skillfulness in action, perhaps, is the way that it's put there. But I mean, I think that for me is a very important teaching, and really changes my day-to-day experience. You know, if I'm able to really be there, I can catch myself, you know, kind of reacting this way or reacting that way, and say, oh, you know, is that really something I want to kind of deal with down the line? If I get angry now, if I, you know, allow that sort of sense of disappointment or disillusionment to settle in because something hasn't sort of turned out the way that I had envisioned. So that's the whole idea of, you know, being attached to things sort of turning out one way or turning out the other way.
Yeah, really, really being here. Right. That's what's so interesting about it too. It's like every moment is an opportunity to practice. Right. It's so immense, exactly. Which I think can feel somewhat overwhelming. Like the truth of that every moment is an opportunity to practice this presence. I wonder too if they, maybe this is not the right word, but I don't know of a better one at this moment to describe it. It feels like there's a certain death actually that needs to occur in order to be fully present. Like something is dying, like you call it the ego or whatever that baggage is. And maybe it dies from a letting go. Maybe letting go is a better word for it. And then it tends to come back. But is that your experience too of like what happens? What is the practice itself that allows for this engagement, this total engagement with the present?
For sure. So I mean, partly I think what you might be getting at there are these different layers of the mind, you know, the chitta being divided into these three different parts. The manas are sort of the part of us that interacts with the outside world through the senses. The ahamkara, which is the sense of, you know, the sort of shape of you, the sort of a sense of you being you as opposed to somebody else, which you might call the ego. And then the buddhi, which is the rational, intellectual part of the mind. And I think that the problem with, you know, often when we act, because we're so bound up in our world of, you know, wanting things to be this way or wanting things to be that way, that's so often bound up as well with our sense of who we are and our ahamkara, the ego, that we often then end up sort of being pulled off into these strong sort of emotional responses to situations that are harmful at the end of the day, because those are generating those sort of undigested emotional components that, you know, you might call karmas that you then have to deal with in the future. So perhaps if you are able to be fully present as you act, then you're able to be aware of these different aspects of your mind and sort of how they want to jump in and get involved in the narrative. And I guess just kind of be careful. You know, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about being careful when you act, that you don't get caught this way, you don't get caught that way. And that you are, in an ideal world, able to, you know, go through every situation, no matter how challenging, and produce a response that's, you know, appropriate, that is not leaving these strong sort of emotional traces that will then stay in your subconscious afterwards.
Good. What do you think is so hard to do? Kind of, you know, like let go of whatever this is that we're, you know, talking about. Why is it so challenging? What's grasping there? You know,
there's many different responses to that. Oh, is there one easy way of putting why it's so difficult? I don't think so. I mean, I think that as human beings, you know, we're we have these different layers of the mind for a reason. Survival, I think, is the primary reason there. We have this sense of I-ness or me-ness to give us something to protect at the end of the day, and it's very strong. It's a very powerful instinct in human beings to protect this me. And I think one important realization that you can come through meditation is that it's really just a function of the brain. It can be switched on and it can be switched off. Most of the time it's switched on and it's very, very loud. But through meditation techniques and through other practices that are sort of outside the realm of yoga, you can switch that sort of I-ness off. And it's very odd. You can look in a mirror and not recognize what you're seeing there. And it's an extremely strange experience. And perhaps that's, sort of relates to this idea of I don't want to use the word ego death because that implies that it's kind of gone.
Yeah, comes back.
And it's very rarely ever gone permanently, not for most people, maybe for a few. For most of us, it comes back and it gets pretty loud again. This is why I really love, I don't know if you've ever read anything by Jack Kornfield, but I do like his book After the Ecstasy, The Laundry, and especially just the title, because it sort of shows you that, people can have these very deeply enlightened experiences, but, you've got to go back and deal with your family and your taxes and, whatever else it is that, is sort of going on in your sort of nitty gritty day-to-day life. And and these experiences of sort of profound transformation that often don't last, I think.
Yeah. I wonder if it's less about clinging to one level and more about cleaning up and appreciating, finding the juice in all the different levels.
For sure. Again, this is, I think, one of the fundamental tensions between Tantra yoga practice and maybe sort of what's termed sometimes classical yoga practice. I don't really like that term very much, to be honest, is that, how much do you embrace human life as a part of your practice? Because there are plenty of yoga teachers who will say to you, well, this is the veil of Maya, it's an illusion, it's something to be detached from, to be overcome, the world of sense pleasures and so on. And then, there was Tantra yoga that sort of turned that on its head and said, well, if everything is divine, everything is one, then who are we to reject human life, which is also part of the divine? So, and that's why they, I don't know if you've ever heard of the 5 M's that they practiced. So things like eating fish, eating meat, drinking fermented liquor, engaging in sexual intercourse as a way of fully engaging with life as a part of the divine. So it's a tension that's very difficult to overcome, I think, sometimes as a practitioner. But I think that there are people who have. Like if you look at Iyengar, for example, and the way that he wrote about yoga practice, he talked about it as having a foot in either world, one foot in Prakriti and one foot in Purusha. And I think for me, that's satisfying to remember that, yes, I'm one, but also I'm the other.
Yeah. Another way to put it that I really like is Ram Dass talks about, taking the curriculum. And I could tell, like, when he had this insight, how much maybe peace it bring to him, and it brings me peace too to consider. It's like, okay, we're born to this person, into this situation, and that's a certain curriculum. This is a university, and so instead of, doesn't seem wise to struggle against what the situation is, but to embrace this curriculum of being a human being. Like, oh, okay, I like that.
For sure. I mean, that's part of about, finding your dharma. That's sort of what the whole the Mahabharata is about. It's about sort of really discovering the sense of, why you in particular were put in this place to perform these functions, and how you can come to some sort of greater knowledge through the living of life.
Um, yeah, so I want to ask about your Dharma. You're, I think now a studio owner, and maybe more importantly, it seems a builder of community, both in person and online. Um, so I want to ask you about that. Like, what are you interested in building? Maybe what are the core tenets, the most important things to you about this community that you're in? Yeah.
For sure. So, I mean, I think I have my own sort of personal values, and then perhaps the values that the business represents as well, or the community. Let's maybe call it that. Sounds nicer. I think what motivated me to get involved in this whole world initially was that I am an educator. Ever since I was a kid, I could remember just enjoying sharing ideas, explaining things, and helping other people with their understanding. And initially, I was involved with the education of different languages around the world, which is a very satisfying area to work in. But I think as I got deeper into my practice, I wanted to share that as well. I think that was the jumping off point, that I became a yoga teacher before I had any vision of being a community organizer or anything like that. But once I got out here to Medellín in Colombia, I found a very interesting environment that has been rapidly and fundamentally changing over the last 10 years. And so when I first arrived here in Medellín, nobody really was, certainly in the local community, practicing yoga. It was considered something, even maybe a little taboo. A lot of people are very strongly Catholic out here, so that association can be problematic for some people. And so initially I was working with quite a lot of foreigners, people who were sort of traveling through or staying for a period of time. But little by little, I've really seen the community here open up massively to the practice of yoga. I mean, it's everywhere now, incredible. Psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, all through different sort of parts of the medical field are recommending yoga to people.
In a pretty short period of time, it sounds like there's a big change in Medellín. Yeah. Wow.
Massive. And so we've really seen they shift away from this sort of focus on kind of exclusively on the community of, foreigners or travelers or whatever, to really being much more a local yoga community that's also open to foreigners. And I think that's really beautiful because there's an openness here amongst the Colombians that I've worked with to really engage with the sort of spiritual aspects of yoga practice in a way that I sometimes don't see in foreign communities, which is unexpected. I really didn't expect that when I came out here. But often the most interesting discussions, when we're looking at different philosophical themes or are ones that I have with the local community in our teacher training programs, and that's been phenomenal. But above and beyond that, I think that people often we live very individualistic and isolated lives sometimes, and people really crave a space where they can connect with other human beings in a way that's not a bar, that's not a discoteca, a nightclub or whatever, and to really make some quality friendships that with people who are interested in asking some more challenging questions. And for sure, that's what we've been working towards with the yoga community here at Flying Tree.
So do you see that serving people? Like, do you witness that? Like people being filled up in a different way, maybe in a way that they didn't even know they were searching for? Absolutely.
And 100%. I mean, and this is why I do it, because organizing a yoga community is not hard. It's stressful. It's a very challenging thing, especially with how fast you need to adapt quite often in the yoga world from a business point of view. And so I'm certainly not doing it because I want this gentle, stress-free life. And I'm certainly not doing it because I enjoy being a protagonist, because that's really not my, style. I think some people love being, perhaps to create this sort of massive international profile. That's really not something I've sought for myself. But really to kind of allow the community to speak for itself, and to be much more about providing spaces for people to do what they need to do. And being a facilitator of spaces, I think, is something that's much more important to me. And it's something that I see, quite often when, for example, we conclude our 200-hour teacher training. The graduating trainees offer a day of free classes to the local public here in Medellín. And those, for me, are just a moment when I get to step back, let them run the show, let them share their teachings, and let other people from the local community who've never maybe practiced yoga before come in, get a free class and a tasty treat at the end of class, and a space to kind of share with one another at the end. And see all of that happening kind of from a back seat is very, very validating. I think, just massively fulfilling. Those are the days that really make me feel that what I'm doing here is worthwhile, for sure.
I know that you have a real passion for education, right? And we throw around the word education, learning quite often. But perhaps it's important to really look at how do people learn, right? And this can even be, at least my mind goes to the difference between, you mentioned being a facilitator, right? So maybe even the difference between that, like that shows me a lot, even that you're interested more in being a facilitator. So yeah, the facilitator or teacher, and does that make a difference? Right. But yeah, more to the point, like what's your viewpoint on how to educate someone, how to, maybe hold their hand, be a place for them to progress, because it's not easy being in a place where you feel like you don't know yet. Or, the first step is always the hardest, right? Clearly the first step is the hardest. So yeah, what's your viewpoint on this process that people go through of learning?
Well, I think that for me, this is one of the major problems with the way that a lot of 200-hour teacher trainings in the world of yoga operate, is that it's a very short amount of time, and you need to impart a very large amount of information within that time frame. And so I think a lot of people end up getting to the end of their 200-hour teacher training having had a lot of sort of knowledge thrust on them, but not very much idea of what to do with it. And a lot of people, obviously, who take teacher trainings don't go on to teach. For many people, they never had the intention to teach in the first place, and that's fair enough. But I've met many other people in the last 10 years who really do want to get teaching, but they lack that sense of self-confidence and personal identity, I guess, as a yoga teacher, once they come out the other side of their 200-hour teacher training. And there really is very little in terms of guidance offered in the yoga world, once you've finished your 200 hours, especially if you've done it in a foreign country, outside of your own regular studio, they sort of pat you on the back, give you a certificate, and then you get on a flight, right? So you're immediately disconnected from the community that you trained with. So one thing that I've been really interested in, both with the international, but also very much with the local community here, is, well, what happens next? Because we've done a portion of the learning together, but we've still got a long way to go. So often what happens after 200-hour teacher trainings is people stay with us. They stay in our community for another month or a couple of months, and they begin to have that time to sort of process a lot of what they've heard, and to begin to figure out who they are. As you know, it's no good repeating what I say is your teacher at the end of the day, because those are my words, and you've got to really figure out what they mean to you in a sort of a way that's truly meaningful. Obviously that goes for asana practice or pranayama practice, fine. But also just for, sort of the greater picture of yoga as well. What is yoga to you? And so that's what I've been really interested in over the last few years, is providing that sort of space for people once they've graduated to really begin to figure out what it is that they want to share and how they want to share it, and to do so in a sort of a supportive and kind environment.
Have you experienced any fear that some studios have of training teachers and then having them maybe open their own studio or have their own clients? It's kind of like this mentality of lack, but I've definitely noticed it myself. But it feels very different than what you're saying. I don't get the sense that that's a focus for you. How do you navigate all that?
It's funny you asked that, because my jaw dropped to the floor recently when one of the people who was training with us here, it was, I don't know, her second or third training. And she'd mentioned that in her first training, she had to sign an agreement with the teacher that she would not work within a certain radius of the studio where she was trained. I just could not believe that. I thought, you're taking a yoga teacher training program and signing a waiver that forbids you to teach. Does nobody see the irony in that? It's just that. But anyway, so yeah, that kind of opened my eyes that other people conceive of this differently. And you know what? I mean, I've had other members of my teaching team open competing communities locally, and graduates open, studios as well. And for sure, I mean, if you're wearing your business hat, then maybe that's something that you've got to deal with. But at the end of the day, we're here to share a practice that's meant to be meaningful and transformational. And I mean, it's my interest at the end of the day to train people who can do that. And as you say, I think a lot of it's perhaps this attitude of scarcity, maybe there not being enough yoga students to go around or something like that. But no, I mean, a lot of my students have gone on to do really amazing, wonderful, creative projects, all around the city, out in their comunas, the popular neighborhoods up on the mountainsides. And you see people's creativity flourish, and it's just it's a beautiful thing. It's not a thing to be suppressed, but celebrated for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about culture a bit. So you're living in Colombia now. I believe you grew up in London. Can you share a little bit about the differences you've observed in culture? And I also get a sense you enjoy learning about those differences. So, yeah.
Oh, for sure. No, and I think I grew up in the UK. I've always been very lucky that when I was in school, I had the opportunity to go and live with different families throughout Europe. I lived with people in Finland, in Poland, Austria, France, Germany. And it was just so fascinating to me, this how different it feels to live in different places, even if it's just for a short time, a week, a couple of weeks. And once I graduated from university, and I was offered the opportunity to work in a liberal arts college out in Vermont, which is where I was teaching ancient languages for a couple of years. That really took me completely. It's from central London out to rural Vermont. I can imagine a bigger sort of change in what it feels like to live in a place. I challenge you to find one. But it really opened my eyes, and it made me feel. I was just so excited to continue living in different cultures and really becoming a part of them. And I moved to Spain after I finished in the United States and spent 3 years in Madrid, continuing to teach languages out there. And I just, I guess I never really wanted to return to somewhat kind of insular mindset that you might find in a small island trapped in the North Sea. And so, when I made the decision to move out here to Colombia, I didn't really know a huge amount about what was, waiting for me out here. But when I arrived, I began to collaborate with different people in yoga and also Thai massage projects that were running out here at the time. And how can you sum up cultural differences in a couple of sentences? But it's a very tropical country.
Maybe a few things you particularly appreciate about Colombian culture.
For sure. So I think how, again, to go back to what I'd mentioned before, just how open people are. People are extraordinarily friendly here, which is not something a lot of people know about, I think, before they come to visit Colombia. But Colombians are remarkably open. And, the number of people who are just walking around my neighborhood here stop to say hi on the street, like, I don't know. I don't think that ever happened to me in London. Do you know what I mean? Probably if somebody tried to stop me on the street, I would run a mile. So I think that in particular, but I mean, as I mentioned, that goes far beyond the sort of superficial, small talk. People, when they come to a teacher training program here, for example, they don't want to just sort of learn about asana or, maybe some breathing exercises or whatever. How do I make an asana class? They really want to engage with yoga as something that informs their whole way of approaching life. And I think that is particularly, that's half of your job done as a teacher. There's so many teacher trainings that I've done in English where you spend 3/4 of the training just trying to kind of soften people and open them up to the possibility that, their worldview is not the only worldview. And so to have people who already come to the training with that attitude is remarkable, because it means that you can immediately get stuck into these very sort of juicy topics, juicy conversations like we're having today.
And I think you fairly recently became a father, right? You were a father of one?
Yeah, about two years and 3 months ago. Yeah. So we're definitely in the middle of the terrible twos right now. There's, I mean, if you want to really test your practice, man, in ways that you never thought you could.
That's what I was going to ask about.
Yeah, no, for sure. Jesus. It's wonderful. I mean, it's very, very challenging, but very, very beautiful at the same time. And no, for sure, it makes you put into practice everything that you've sort of a stress test for all of your yoga practices, if ever there was one, I think.
Right. Yeah. Has it taught you anything about the power of leading by example?
Yes. Yes, unfortunately. I mean, as I say, it kind of brings to light all of the good, but also all of the bad, the ways that when you're tired, you're burnt out, you react in a way that's unhelpful or unhealthy. You can see the effects of it right away. Yeah. So it teaches you to be, for sure, much more careful with your actions, everything that you do, because the young children pick everything up, everything, and they imitate, which is really beautiful, cute sometimes. Like you just learn to say cup of tea, and then do a little cheers with his cup, which is not something I ever taught him, but it's just something that he picked up one way or another. But for sure, yeah. So if you are going to be reactive and react in a way that it contains frustration and anger, that's something that will have an immediate effect on your child, and it's something that you very quickly have to learn to be very careful with, I think.
Yeah. About care for language in general. You seem to be a student of language, gone deep into a few different ones. How's that knowledge of language itself, impacted you?
Yeah, I think language is so fascinating because it really shapes the entire way that we view the world. So often I've seen that in one language there's quite often a word that is impossible to translate into another language because it doesn't contain all of the different flavors and nuance. And that's why if you're ever going to read poetry, it's best to read it in the original language, because you can't take that and put it into another language and expect to have everything retained. It's impossible. And as I begin to delve deeper into Sanskrit, I begin to understand that, just the very sounds themselves in Sanskrit sort of contain the meaning of the word itself. Really fascinating ideas that I'm beginning to come across. I'm very much a beginner with Sanskrit, so please don't ask me more complex questions about it. I think there are other people who can give you much more satisfying answers there. But as a linguist, for sure, it begins to show me that, for example, the whole way that we conceive the world in front of us is often this sort of cultural linguistic layer that we've been taught to kind of put on the world that's in front of us. And I think it, as a result, makes you more open to understanding, or at least engaging with other people's worldviews at the end of the day, people who differ from you politically, culturally, in terms of their sort of priorities in life, and beginning to learn that it's just again another layer of the mind.
Well, have you done much consideration for kind of the origins of language? Because it fascinates me a lot. Like, when were these things, developed, and how? Like, can you imagine being in the position where you're beginning to label things and create sounds with your mouth and just say, okay, this is bowl. We're going to call this bowl. Like, it's remarkable. We're so distant for it because we're like so much further along. But that's a really interesting thing to me to consider.
Well, it's a process, right? It never stops. If you look at English today, compared to Shakespearean English, Middle English, and Old English, what comes before that? The roots that we have in Romance languages, the roots from Latin, roots from ancient Greek. It's a very fluid process that's not confined to any one time or even geographical area. You look at the way that language is being used in one part of England, and you compare that to part of Ireland or part of Scotland and a part of the United States and a part of Canada. Language is being used very, very differently in all of those different areas. And now, of course, we've got the fact that we are communicating with often with people across massive geographical distances as well, and how that's changing language. I see here in Colombia the amount of American English that kind of seeps its way into the language as well is really fascinating. So it's very much like this kind of amorphous, nebulous kind of cloud that's continually changing across space and time, and it is never the same in one place ever, even for one person. You probably use your language differently today than you did 10 years ago, I imagine. So
even in a given moment, considering teaching a yoga class, right? I mean, every class that I teach, I think all of us teach, language is used a little bit differently. Like the moment calls for something, produces something. If someone here is listening and they're a yoga teacher, do you have anything you want to say in regard to the use of language and teaching the yoga class?
Absolutely. And it all comes back again to consciousness, right? That I think so often we get into habit patterns. I mean, that's what we do as human beings. And that's absolutely the case for yoga teachers, teaching us in the practices as much as for anyone else. We quite often just repeat the phrases that we've been used to repeating for the last number of years that we've been teaching. And it all becomes very sort of kind of automated, as it were. But I think that quite often teaching requires us to be very present, to be good observers of what we see happening in the class around us, and to carefully tailor our language for what we see happening in front of us, and obviously for the kind of teaching that we want to impart as well. And that for me is I think probably one of the greatest challenges for a lot of yoga teachers is how do you make the practice something that is really connected to what yoga has meant for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, as opposed to it just being a physical kind of workout routine. And that requires a conscious use of language, the way that you weave the knowledge of yoga into an asana practice is a very challenging thing to do, I think.
Yeah. Maybe consider someone who is just beginning their yoga practice, right? They're coming into a class for the first time. And, I've often heard it said, right, like the workout aspect of it, the physical, getting in shape is often the first step, the doorway, what interests someone, for starting. And then down the line, they, expand to see yoga as a larger thing, a way of life, whatever it is. I'm wondering, is that, the most effective path, to focus on the physical aspect to begin with? Or do you think more people would be interested in knowing right from the get-go that this thing that I'm walking into is a lot larger than just the physical aspect?
Well, and that's again perhaps where I see a difference culturally between Colombia and maybe the United States, is that yoga is often very secular in the United States. There's often a great fear of engaging with what might be sort of considered spiritual, or heaven forbid something religious that clashes with your own worldviews or whatever. And I've even heard about yoga studios where it's sort of explicitly forbidden to talk about spiritual themes in class, which again just seems completely absurd. Utterly, fine, call it something else, don't call it yoga at the end of the day if that's what you're trying to promote. So here in Colombia, I think a lot of people who do come along to yoga class, they're not coming for the workout culture. I mean, there's a ton of CrossFit and gyms and all of that kind of stuff. If you want to get involved in that, there's a lot of places where it's very easy to do so. So I think by the time people come through the front door here at Flying Tree, they're already interested in it for something more, right? And that might be for sure to do with like mental well-being, stress reduction. But for a lot of people, it's because they feel that they live in this sort of post-spiritual kind of vacuum where they don't feel themselves to be aligned with the values that their sort of traditional religions provided for them. But they feel a strong desire to engage spiritually with other human beings in a community. And I think that that's where yoga as a practice is so attractive to many people, is that it doesn't necessarily require you to be a devotee of, a deity or God or whatever, but can allow you to engage with your spirituality, connect with God as well, for sure, in a meaningful way that, is perhaps outside of the walls of a traditional religious establishment.
And so I'm recalling that you mentioned earlier kind of that there was resistance in Colombia maybe to opening up to yoga for this reason of maybe, I don't know, I got the impression maybe an allegiance to traditional religion that they had, and therefore, hesitancy to enter yoga. But now that that's changed, what you're saying is maybe now that they got through that barrier, they're very open to the spiritual aspects of yoga. Is that right?
Well, I don't want to paint such a simple picture because it's not. I mean, there's. I knew my wife, when she was pregnant, was gifted a retreat, basically, and we thought, great, time to go out into nature, to be with the baby, just to really connect. And the day before she went on this retreat, sort of an email came through saying, don't forget to bring your Bible. And so we thought, what kind of retreat has been gifted to her? And of course, she went along to this retreat, and it was a conversion camp. that she ended up in. And there was a lot of psychological pressure, to renounce allegiance to other spiritualities, to renounce tattoos and piercings. By the way, you're going to go to hell if it's here, but if it's here, it's okay. I mean, how absurd is that? Right? It's just utterly crazy to me. And she took it all with, good humor, of course. So it's not like that doesn't still exist, because it absolutely does. And we get people who, I still get text messages offering to save my soul, which is always an interesting thing to deal with at 8 on a Monday morning, right? As you're sort of opening up the studio.
It's my soul needed saving. Yeah.
Right. But I think that there is a sort of people are becoming more comfortable with the fact that yoga is not necessarily something that requires you to devote yourself to a Hindu god. I mean, for some people, that for sure is an aspect of yoga, and that's it. But it doesn't need to be. So there's that, and I think that a lot of the younger generation as well, they're just open. As I say, they don't feel that they need to be represented by traditional religious practices, but they still have that need to be spiritual, to be spiritual in a community of other like-minded people. So yeah, it's a complicated picture, and it's ever evolving, but for sure there is much more of a, let's just say, an interest on the level of sort of society here as to what yoga might open people up to that they maybe weren't open up to before.
Opening up to and maybe this celebration of life, coming back to where we began a little bit, because I just think there's such an important emphasis is on celebration. It feels to me it's like it's the most appropriate response to life. Actually, it's like we were born into this situation. Not that it's to kind of gloss over the more challenging aspects of life or the darker aspects. But even that is a sort of like a fascination at the complexity of the whole thing. It can be so many different things. But one thing that it definitely seems to be to me is like wonderful, like in the way, not like in the positive sense, but just filled with wonder. Like this situation, it's like, oh my gosh, like it's incredible. And to celebrate being alive. I wonder if like the community that you're talking about, like yoga communities in general, like if we support each other together to kind of move forward in this aspect of celebrating life, I wonder if maybe so many of the so-called problems, will just drop away with this perspective of celebration.
And I think this is a really nice way of tying together many of the diverse aspects of the conversation that we've had today. Colombia is a country that's gone through very, very difficult times and continues in some parts of Colombia to, people have been through a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of internal displacement, a lot of refugees within the country, a lot of violence that people have suffered over there. Last 30, 40, 50 years. And beyond that, I think, you just have to turn on the TV, look at your news app, right? And see just how many things that are going on in the world that can make you feel very dispirited, I think, as a human being. It's the trajectory of humanity. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in that worldview. Many people are working a job that they don't find satisfying. They're not earning enough through it to live comfortably. They're looking at a future that looks very bleak, maybe for generations to come. And in fact, having a child for me really helped me to kind of reshape my own attitude towards that as well. Because, there was a time when I was thinking, well, do I want to bring a kid into such a challenging environment that doesn't look very good in the long run? And I think that to embrace life and to, as you say, sort of see it as wonder, something that provokes wonder and amazement, and to remember to take the time in your day to see life that way is such an important thing. And I think that yoga is a vehicle very much for doing that, for recognizing the wondrousness of life. And again, to go back to the Bhagavad Gita, I think one thing that Krishna is trying to help Arjuna do as they move through the discussion is to put his struggles into a greater perspective. As you say, if the sort of the problematic aspects kind of drop away for Arjuna in the face of this wonder that he's able to see through the experiences that he has with Krishna. And of course, that very famous passage where Krishna reveals his true form to Arjuna, and Arjuna's hair stands on end because he's seeing Krishna mashing up entire worlds in his teeth. And it's just this very fantastical reminder of of how we can ourselves sort of find that shift in perspective to see the sometimes hair-raising wonder of life through our practice, for sure.
Well, amen. Well, Andrew, I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thanks for being you, for doing all that you're doing. If people are interested in finding out more about you and Flying Tree Yoga, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think our website has it all, flyingtreeyoga.com. And there you'll find links to everything else, our trainings, our internship program. If you are a teacher who's feeling like you're not quite there yet and you want to have some supportive and kind guidance and begin to find your sort of voice as a yoga teacher and your self-confidence, that information about that program is there as well. Our Spanish language course for yoga teachers, if you want to learn how to share your practice in a second language. So all of that information is on the website. That's probably the best place to start.
And you have a lot of offerings online, yeah?
We have a couple of offerings online. So especially if you're interested in learning Spanish, that sort of combines my different nerdy passions as a language teacher and as a yogi. So yeah, for sure, if people were, and just send me a message. I'm always very, very happy to talk to people, to communicate, to connect. So if you want to find a time for a quick chat, or Zoom or whatever, I'm always very happy to do that with whoever's interested.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to chat with you today.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.